The Detroit Pistons are in a terrible spot right now. They are most likely the worst team, the worst constructed roster in the entire league. They're playing like the worst team in the league. They just lost to the Wizards, who are terrible. And the big issue in Detroit isn't just that they're bad right now, but the future doesn't look very good either, which brings up some massive questions. By the way, if you guys want to hang out with me on a live stream, I have a link for that in the description. Playback.tv/sportinglogically. I'm doing NBA trade machine content over there, making up trades. We're doing NBA watch parties where I'm watching the games every single week. I'm live over there at playback.tv/sportinglogically. I would love to have an opportunity to hang out with you guys, just chat it up, talk about basketball. So click that link. Now, the Detroit situation is very interesting because this is a team that a lot of people had, I wouldn't say expectations, but there was some hope behind this team because last year was so terrible for them. Cade missing so much time. Then they get rid of their coach. They really heavily invest in bringing in Monty Williams in terms of how much money they're paying him. They had a really good chance at having a really high pick in the draft lottery. They end up with Asar Thompson, who ends up being awesome. And you come into this season thinking Cade, Jaden Ivey, Asar Thompson, these guys are all top 5 picks. These guys are all, young and developing, and we can have something here on the perimeter. And then all these front court players that we have, a couple of veterans, guys like Bogdanovich, and they have just been awful and terrible. And it makes you think, and it makes you wonder about where do you go from here? Because it's one thing to be a bad basketball team, to win 20, 25 games, less than that sometimes in a single season. In this era that we've gone through the last decade where teams are actively trying to lose games, actively trying to tank, Detroit being one of those teams over the last couple of seasons, it's not the end of the world when you're one of those teams. If you're building towards something, if you're putting together a young core to be excited about, if you're putting together a roster that makes sense, it's just young. And that's the problem that Detroit is running into right now, is not only are they bad, but I'm not convinced that in 2 or 3 more seasons, even of adding more and more talent and continuing to tank, that they're going to be any good at that point either. Asar Thompson and Cade Cunningham, those guys are awesome. Those are the only 2 players in the entire roster that I'm confident are going to be real positive influences on Detroit basketball over the next couple of seasons. I don't feel great about Jaden Ivey, despite the fact that I really liked him last year in the draft, and he had some good moments last year. With this new coaching staff, there's clearly something going on where they don't like him as much, and they've got like a million guys in the front court that are all young, that are all trying to prove something. Isaiah Stewart got a new contract. They have Marvin Bagley there. James Wiseman is there. It is just a weird situation with everybody outside of Asar Thompson and Cade Cunningham. And what it made me think about was the possibility of doing a rebuild, right? So if this group isn't going to work, if it's going to be this bad, because remember, the 2024 draft does not have a Victor Wembanyama, Scoot Henderson, Brandon Miller level player in the draft. This is not supposed to be a good draft. So there's no savior coming for Detroit next year, assuming they have the worst record in the league and get the first overall pick. If that's going to be the case, and they're going to go into next year with basically the same team and be this bad again, at what point do you start thinking about resetting the rebuild again? I know that Cade has only been there for a few seasons, but there's been some buzz. There's been some rumors that maybe they would look to possibly trade Cade Cunningham, and that seems extreme, right? But I think that Detroit is in an extreme situation here, given how terrible they are and how limited their future appears to be. Now, granted, we've had similar conversations about this with teams over the last couple of years, like Houston, for example, that was really, really bad for a couple of years. We didn't really know what the direction was. We didn't know, with last year, the way the team performed, if there was ever going to be significant upside, if they were ever going to really improve. And this year, they've been good. They brought in veterans. They brought in a new coach. Everything looks great now, right? Because they were able to make those extra moves on the edges, and Detroit is going to have the opportunity from a spending standpoint to do the same thing. The problem is they brought in the coach. They invested in the coach the way that Houston invested in the coach in Ime Udoka, and it hasn't given them any sort of improvement. And I think almost even more worryingly, I don't know how the roster is supposed to fit together. Everybody loves Asar Thompson, but he cannot shoot the basketball at all. And Cade is awesome, but he's extremely inefficient right now, and he's playing in a role that is not natural for him. He's supposed to be a guy that elevates other players around him with his size and his skill and his playmaking, not this, let's rely on Cade Cunningham for absolutely everything every time down the floor, and his game is suffering as a result. And really, I think the pieces that are missing for them are Jaden Ivey becoming a better complement alongside Cade Cunningham and a foundational piece for the team moving forward. He's still an extremely young player, someone that is ideally going to continue to grow and improve, and it's still too early to just give up on him, but him being basically nothing, not ideal. And then any kind of front court pairing that actually works, things are just really, really bad in Detroit. Now, if I was a Pistons fan, I wouldn't want them to trade Cade Cunningham. I think there are going to be rumors. I think there are going to be reports. I think that's going to be a thing. So I would prepare yourself for that to be a thing, because I think it's going to be. But I wouldn't want them to, just because it's hard. Just look at what Detroit has done, with this most recent draft. It's hard to end up with a guy that's worthy of being the first overall pick. And I still think Cade is really, really good. And the only reason you would trade him is one, if you don't believe in him that much long term and you want to get value out of him, or two, you're concerned about having to pay him a ton when the team might still be bad a couple of years from now. So I definitely would hold on to him unless you get some kind of crazy, insane offer for Cade. And really the long-term concern is about the other pieces on the roster. Like I talked about earlier with Houston, it is possible to have a sudden turnaround, for things to change extremely quickly, and all of a sudden you're at least, a decent team, a team that has some kind of hope of making the playoffs and provides a little bit of hope to your fan base. That's definitely possible. It's hard to see that vision right now. And when it's that difficult to see the vision of where can we go from here, despite all these young players, despite all this investment in the coaching staff and the players from a draft pick standpoint, a lot of high first round picks on the roster, and you can't even win 2 out of every 20 games, like that's going to be pretty rough. And so that's how you get to this point of thinking about a possible Cade Cunningham trade. It's not what I would want, but you can understand how you would get there, because if things are going to be this bad, then what really is the point of keeping Cade around? And long term, they'll ultimately probably be better throughout the year. It's a new coaching staff. Maybe they'll make a move at the deadline. Maybe they'll get younger, trading away guys like Bogdanovich or something, and get some more value and some assets to help them into the future. But it's just a difficult situation because of the draft class, because there's no immediate help. And what you're looking at right now with the way that the Pistons are, without potentially reckless free agent spending this offseason, you're looking at like a minimum of another 18 to 20 months of the Pistons looking like this is a team, because you're not going to get some kind of great transformative player in the draft coming up in 2024. And you're probably going to be just this bad again next year, again, without borderline reckless spending in free agency. And if they hadn't brought in Monty Williams, if they were still trying to figure out the coaching situation, I think it would be different. But clearly they thought that he was the guy and they invested in him, and not seeing significant improvement with him there is a big concern. Now, granted, it's still early in the year, right? There's still plenty of time to try and figure this out. Maybe they'll look better. Maybe they'll get more comfortable. Maybe they'll figure out their rotations. Maybe it's just a bad start for a couple of their guys. And it is really exciting that they have Asar Thompson and everybody loves him and he's this incredible defensive player. Like that's fantastic. You want to have foundational pieces, but is he a piece that is going to work alongside Cade Cunningham long-term offensively? I think that's a fair question. Obviously he's going to improve, but he needs to improve significantly as a jump shooter. And if it's just those two guys, the future might be bleaker there than any other like young rebuilding-ish team. And it's unfortunate because a couple of months ago, there was the possibility that Detroit was going to get a top 3 pick in this draft, a very likely chance that they were going to get either Brandon Miller, Scoot Henderson, or Victor Wembanyama, all of which would have been awesome fits in Detroit. And sometimes that's just how it works out. They had the worst record in the league, ended up with the 5th overall pick, and ended up with the guy that they love in Asar Thompson, but isn't on the impact level in terms of long-term potential as I would say at this point, Brandon Miller, and then of course Victor Wembanyama as well. And it's a team that I'm still excited about and I want to see them continue to grow, but this is going to be a thing over the next couple of months. Teams are going to call about Cade. There's going to be rumors about them possibly trading Cade, and I wouldn't do it, nor would I hope for it to happen if I was a Pistons fan, but I can see the line of thinking that would possibly get you to Cade Cunningham not being a Detroit Piston in a couple of months.